half on Ontario. Half off on the plan. Half off on furniture.
She married him, and she's Matilda Phillips.
And she was a foreman.
Uh-huh.
Now, do you remember anything about her parents?
No, I don't.
Was that the foreman that went off and fought the Yankees?
Yeah, and he went through Georgia, and from Georgia on into Virginia.
Was he the one that got shot in the Bible?
Uh-huh. He got shot and lost a finger, and he got a furlough home, and that's when Uncle Elliot was, when he got Uncle Elliot, in other words. And then he went back, and he got wounded again, and they carried him to Washington, to the hospital, and he died. That's where he died. And he was buried in Arlington Cemetery, and Grandma and none of the children didn't know where he was buried until just a few years before Grandma died.
And let's see, what was his, John Foreman?
His name was James Foreman.
James Foreman, buried in Arlington. That's our great-grandpa.
My great-grandpa.
Your my great-great-grandpa.
Uh-huh. And Dob has got his billfold that he had in his pocket when he got killed.
Well, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and it's got holes where worms had eaten it when it got back to Grandma.
Okay, and it was him that, his family, that traded the corn with the Indians?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get that. I've got two baskets. You can tell me which one's right. Well, the basket's supposed to be right here.
There's one in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I think that in the kitchen is, I'll have to look at the handle good.
What about this?
No, that weren't the one. Mama's first cousin made the handle. The handle had got off of it some way, and Annie Day, Mama's first cousin, made this handle herself and put it on the basket. This was the very one to give Grandma's granddaddy for corn.
Huh. Well, so that basket was made by Indians, and they'd make two baskets, is that the thing?
Yeah, they'd make two, just like, and they'd give Grandpa one empty, and they'd want cornmeal in theirs. They wouldn't turn theirs loose. They'd hold it out, and wanting cornmeal in theirs.
And that was a foreman, and they lived up towards
in Bullock County, if you know where that is. I don't.
Bullock County, Alabama.
It works up there above Skipperville. It's somewhere in Alabama anyway. And great-grandpa, you know, they wore the long dress like things then in the place of pants.
Yeah.
And he had this real fancy buggy, and the old black man that been with him while they grew up together. And he'd go drive him into town to get the month's supply, and Grandpa would have to use the bathroom, and he'd get outside the road, and one day Grandma got on to him about it, and he said, well, I turned my dress over my head, nobody don't know my ass from nobody else. And he had these two big old black horses. And Grandma said one time she was going to ride one of them, and he went around the barn and pushed her off at the corner of the barn, and that broke her from riding horses.
Creek, and that was back in the days after, right
That
after the war between the states.
during the Civil War. You see, when Grandpa's great-grandpa Foreman had to go to the army, well, Grandma and them was scattered. Because her mother couldn't take care of all of them, and so then she died, and great-grandpa took all of them then. Got all the children back.
Yeah. Well, which ones was the ones that owned, where we owned the capital, the state of Alabama?
That was Grandma Yarbrough.
Okay, so we were talking about Edie's family, and now let's talk about Henry's family a little bit. Henry Yarbrough's family.
Okay.
Which, it was a Yarbrough that owned that land where,
No,
what do you call it, Goat Hill?
Yeah. That was Grandpa Yarbrough's parents, I reckon.
So that was Henry's daddy's parents.
Yeah, and then Grandma owned that around the Capitol, you know. It's from the state capitol down to the cemetery. She owned all of that that way.
Oh.
And when Grandpa got in trouble again and went to Texas, she sold it for a son and the following.
So back in those, I wonder if this was before the war between the states or after?
It must have been after, because Papa was born, he was 3 years old when Grandpa Yarbrough got killed. 3 months old.
And Henry Yarbrough's daddy liked to gamble. He went out to Texas to live, and his wife followed him out there. What happened to him out there?
Well, Granny bought land, you know, where their ranch, they called it, out there, and there's all the tinned in that. And he was off riding his horse and gambling, going to the racetrack. And something come up at the racetrack, they never did find out exactly what. And he had trouble there, and somebody shot him.
Well, how did the family find out about him?
They put him across his horse, and the horse carried him home.
So, my great-great-grandpa got shot at a horse race gambling.
In Texas.
I guess there's a moral to that.
In Bowie County, Texas.
Bowie County, Texas. They said, but he had a farm. He didn't own a saloon or own part of one.
No, he didn't. He just, well, he ought to, from what Aunt Ada said, that he stayed there enough to own it.
Bowie County, Texas. You don't remember the name of the town?
No, I don't remember the name of the towns. Well, Aunt Ada didn't. She's the one that told me all about it not long before she died. And
well, how did Papa's mama get home?
well, she sold her ranch out in Texas to get the money to come home on.
And they brought little Henry and
it was
Ada
Aunt Ada, Uncle Oss, and Uncle Herbert, and Papa, and Aunt Fanny. Aunt Babe, we called her.
Aunt Babe?
Yeah, and Aunt Matt. That was Maggie and them's mom, Aunt Matt was.
And where did they come back and live?
They lived right across from Grandpa Phillips's old home place there, you know, where Grandpa and Grandma died.
The house that they tore down when they built...
when they built Gayron's house there. And Leon and Cody, you know, lived in Aunt Matt's house. Granny's and Aunt Matt and all that. And then when all the children married, Granny just went from one child to the other, you know, and stayed with them.
So, Grandpa Phillips lived on one side of the road?
And Granny and...
moved on the other side?
Yeah, Granny lived on the other side.
What did they do? Did they buy that land or they rented it?
No, Grandpa let them live there for nothing. Grandpa Phillips did, and they'd, you know, they'd help people work in the field. That's all you could do back then. And
so there's Grandpa Phillips living on one side of the road, and he had a daughter named Evie.
yeah, that was Mama.
And then this lady that had come in had a son named Henry, that lived across the road.
Yeah.
And so they got together and got married.
Yeah.
Well, what provisions did Grandpa Phillips make for Henry and Evie?
Well, he bought them that, gave them that, house there where Mama's house is now. And
That same house?
well, they, you know, they built onto it and sealed it and a lot of that. It had a porch, kitchen that went off from the house.
Yeah.
A big old room, and it had a big old fireplace in it, and a porch on each side of the old kitchen.
I remember when it had the a porch on the front.
Yeah, it had one on the front and one on the back, on each side of the old kitchen.
Yeah. And then they fixed Earl a room, didn't they?
Yeah, and it was a hall in it.
Yeah, was the hall all the way down the middle?
Yeah, and it went on into the kitchen.
Okay. And that's where. Now, where were you born?
I was born right there in that house.
I said, well, were all of them born there?
Yeah, every one of Mama's children was born there.
Born there in the house. So that's where my mama was born.
Yeah.
Well, name all your brothers and sisters.
Well, I started the oldest and come down. There was Olita and Lois and R.E. and Flossie. You know, they died.
Yeah, R.E. and Flossie. What happened to them?
They, R.E. the boy had colitis and died. And you know, way back then they didn't know nothing about colitis.
Yeah.
And then Flossie had scarlet fever and she died. And then, and me, and then Dob and Earl, Bessie and Charlotte.
Well, which one's the meanest out of the bunch?
Charlotte.
Charlotte was the meanest.
The pettiest.
I see. Which one is the best?
Olita and Lois.
And Earl.
And Earl.
And Dob. I tell you, there's a bunch of good ones, I think.
Well, I tell you, Dob and Earl, though, they're getting the scraps when they're young.
Well, I think Mama was pretty bad at getting a scrap and fuss, too.
She'd fight the devil if he'd come along and said something she didn't like.
Yeah. I kind of thought that she might not have been, in a way she was good, but in a way she'd...
Oh, yeah, she was good and kind to people, you know, sorry for people that was less fortunate than her. But her and her cousin Leona, I reckon they fought all their lives.
Well, did they get along when they wasn't fighting, or they just enemies?
They just ignored each other.
Huh. Well,
Leona was mean as a rattlesnake, and Lois didn't take none of it.
I bet she's kind of mean, too, sometimes.
Leon and Lenny Elders, the twins,
Yeah.
they'd do everything they could to get her started.
To get Mama started?
Yeah. And then her and Leona would get to fighting, but she always won. Leona never did win a fight. When she'd start to hit her, she'd tell somebody to get her glasses. I reckon she wanted to put her eyes out, but she didn't care how she hurt her no other way.
Now, Aunt Olita married who?
Spurgeon Smith.
They had...
3 boys. And Spurgeon, you know, had a daughter by his first wife.
Yeah. Which all of them loved
Charlene.
her. They still love Charlene just like...
Yeah, well, they don't know the difference because they's all raised up together.
And so Aunt Olita's 3 sons are...
Jerry and Sammy and Terry. Well, it was Jerry, Larry, and Terry.
Yeah.
But I said I'd never call Sammy Larry, so his name's Larry Simeon after his granddaddy Smith.
And his name was Simeon.
Uh-huh.
And that's a monkey, I think.
Yeah, and his daddy Smith that was his name. And so he...
Oh, come here, little girl. Stand right here just a minute. Well, I don't guess she's going to be feeling.
She's scared she's going to not get that ready for school Monday.
Okay, and so, well, I called Simmy at his bank one time and asked to speak to Simmy Smith, and they was all kind of chuckling, and he asked me in a real nice way that when I called the bank, would I, if it was all right to ask for Larry Smith.
Yeah, well, you know, I went my money was in his bank. That's the reason I put it in the City National in Dupin, because he worked there. And one day, they'd send a check for you to fill out to the insurance company.
Yeah.
And they pretended they lost it. And so I was about to lose out on my insurance, it was about to go dead on my house insurance, and I had to have that because the house weren't paid for. So I called the bank, and my supervisor and myself stayed on the bank with Simi all day, and I asked to speak to Simi, and that girl that answered the phone says, "Do you mean Larry Smith?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, but I don't call him that. I don't like the name of Larry." And so she got Simi on the phone, and we stayed on the phone all day. And Simi told me to write a check to him and mail it, and he'd see that it weren't dead on my house. So I did. And then they lost one of my payroll checks at the bank. And that's another day I didn't work, to stay on the telephone all day. But,
those banks can mess you up.
yeah, so,
Okay, so that was Aunt Olita, and she married Spurgeon Smith, and they had 3 sons, and she died about, you know what year?
no, I don't. If you can count back from
Terry was, what?
9 years old when she died.
And he's about 39, so it's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's been about 1958, something like that.
Something like that. She was 54 and Lois was 54 when they died.
Yeah. And Charlotte was scared to hit 54, but I think she's already hit it.
Yeah, I imagine she did.
Okay. All right, so, and then Lois, now how did she get to Washington, D.C.?
Well, you see, Tia, Spurgeon's sister, was working up there. And it's back during the Depression and no jobs for nobody. She went to Florida and worked in the canning plant one winter. And
Where in Florida did she go?
Frostproof.
And so she left Dale County and went to Frostproof, Florida during the Depression and worked in a canning factory.
Yeah, for one winter. And then that summer, Tia got her a job in Washington. And so
That was kind of hard to get a job, wasn't it?
yeah, it was hard to get a job, but Tia got her one, and she went up there, and that's where she met your daddy, and they married. And
yeah.
then the war broke out, and Hugh had to go to the Army, and she got to be in a nervous wreck. She was nervous the rest of her life.
Yeah. Yeah, Daddy tells a story that he went off to the war and was gone 3 years, and he's real tickled when he got back. He had a brand new baby.
Yeah.
But I think it was the time didn't work out really exactly like that. He was back a few months before that.
Yeah, he was back before he was born, because Olita and Sammy went up there,
Yeah.
And
he told that to somebody, though, that he's gone for 2 or 3 years and came back and had a new son.
Oh.
And they said, "Oh, yeah." And then got to add 2 or 3 years. Well, let's. How long did? Do you know how long Mama actually lived in Washington, D.C.?
no, I don't. She lived a lot of years, though, because Charlotte was a little old bitty thing when she went to Washington. And then she lived up there after Wallace was up a great big boy.
Yeah.
Well, you was born up there, and
She came back in 1948, I think, 48
Yeah.
or 49. Came back to Alabama, and that's the first time I'd come back and
was scared of the cedar tree. She said the reason you crawled under the Christmas tree, and it stung you, and the light bulbs was hot to you, and that was the reason you was scared. And you hadn't ever seen no sand, and I carried you out in the yard, set you down, and you had the sand, and you'd hold your head over like that and pour the sand down. She like had a heart attack when she seen all that sand in your hair.
I'd never really got in any dirt before.
No, sir. They had these oil floors in the apartment where her and Hugh lived.
Yeah.
And our distance, well, it's our first cousin's daughter was up there. She married up there too. And she put her baby down on the floor. She weren't scared because her daddy was like Lois. He's always scared. Uh, she was going to get a germ. She's the only child, too. Scared she was going to get a germ, and so she just said she meant that her children was going to be raised up to eat anything that they could pick up. And she put her down on that old lolly floor, and she said Lois would run her down and wipe her hand, and that was before you was born. She said she put her up to the table to eat and didn't wash her hands, and said, oh, Lois sat there and frowned all the time. But she weren't never like Lois was. Lois was scared you was going to get a germ.
Well, I don't think she'd ever let me eat candy. I reckon who was the first one to ever give me any candy?
It was me. And she had to put you on that old knit, long gown to knit in the summertime to sleep in. And I'd slip in there every time I could and pull it off of you. And you went in there, she had you bathed and ready for bed. And you was holding your hands behind you. She said, Eddie, what you got? And you say, Billy Markey, Billy Markey. And she said, yeah, you got candy.
Well, I remember you coming in from work or coming in for something, and we was always, me and Terry was waiting for Bennie Frank, because it always have something from the store, always some candy or something.
Yeah.
Play pretty or something. You know?
Yeah, she always, she didn't, you swallow chewing gum. But I'd ease you a little piece, because Wallace had eaten it all his life and it didn't hurt.
Okay.
And let you go to the table and eat any way you wanted to when she wouldn't be around, which weren't very often. Once in a while she'd go to town and leave you, but not very often.
How long did she, when she and I came down and flew down on an airplane, didn't we?
Yeah, and Papa met the plane, and you never had seen him before, and you ran to him with your arms out like that.
Just like I knew it.
Yeah, and probably did.
Yeah. Let's see, and she was here. Daddy hadn't come down yet.
No, he was finishing up something in Washington before he left.
So that's when we came down. I think we got some pictures of Earl putting me on a tractor and things like that.
Yeah, all of that.
That must happen. Then, of course, we'd come over every few months from Atmore anyway.
Yeah.
Especially after we got our 1950 Ford.
Yeah, she learned how to drive.
Well, I remember us coming over on the bus. We would get on a Greyhound in Atmore and ride the bus over.
To Dothan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And we did that several times.
Yeah, you did.
I guess that was maybe when he needed the car or something.
Yeah, that was right ugly what said, that old principal of the school, what was his name? That was
Butler?
I don't remember his name. I thought it was Maxwell, but it weren't. Charlotte said it weren't him. That he was always the doctor.
Yeah.
Said that Hugh was trying to teach Lois how to drive, and said they stopped at the principal's office, and he sort of took them under his wing, when they went over there.
Yeah.
And said Lois was just a crying and a crying. Said Hugh, I swear, she called me a son of a bitch. She said, no, I didn't do no such a thing. I said, you acted like one.
And he was trying. Well, she didn't know how to drive till then.
No, and he was teaching her to drive. I don't blame him, though, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't even let LJ be in the car with me when I was learning how. I said, no, either Mr. Sherman or John Sim will teach me. I said, well, I can show. I said, no, you won't either. And Mr. Sherman and John Sim was good to teach me. They'd have me to stop, if I made a mistake, and then they'd tell me what the mistake was, and they wouldn't.
Yeah. You got more patience with somebody that you don't live with all the time.
Yeah.
Let's see. Earl went off in the Second World War and was in the Navy.
Yeah.
Did Dob go off, or he stay home?
No. Well, he went to Korea War.
He did. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Well, what was Dob in?
Just a regular army.
He was the Army? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he stayed. That's the reason his stomach's in the shape it's in.
So Dob went off to the war in Korea after the Second World War.
Yeah, and he didn't. He left, when Theodore Faye was little. Now, Annette, knew him, But that Theodore didn't. She had never seen him.
Huh.
And Merlene and the two girls was living in an apartment out there at Ozark.
Yeah.
And he got in late one afternoon. And Dob went to bed. He was tired, and he took his bath and went to bed right after he got through eating. And Merlene told Theodore to go in there and go to bed. And she went in there and she went back. No man in bed. She didn't even know him. And he couldn't turn Annette loose. But Fairface, she didn't know him. His picture, she knew that was her daddy, but she didn't know him.
And well, after he got out of the army, he worked for the government there at Fort Rooker till he could retire.
Yeah. Well, no, to start with, he worked with somebody else. You know, Fort Rooker went dead.
Yeah.
And it was Camp Rooker then, you know.
Yeah.
And it went dead, and then they opened it back up and had it as air helicopters and all that, you know. And they named it Fort Rooker then, because they made a fort out of it. And he started work there not long after it opened up.
And he
worked
stayed
there
with
till he retired. And Earl worked there a while as a cook, but he quit.
Earl, let's see, I remember him, the main thing he did, he worked at Danley's for a long
Danley
time.
Furniture Company.
Delivered furniture and stuff like that. And got Sue a job there too.
Yeah.
And then after Earl worked at Danley's, let's see, Earl married a lady named Vi.
Yeah, from
Dothan. And then they went down and lived in Florida.
And he was the manager of this lumber company there, and
they did well down in Florida.
Yeah, the real well that stayed down there.
She had a kind of a boarding house.
Yeah.
And rented out rooms, and he worked and made good money. And he's drinking a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, he was bad to drink. One night, it was a man in one of their upstairs rooms, and nobody hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 days, and she tried to get her boys to go up there and see about him, see if he was up there sick. They wouldn't do it. And then she tried to get her daughter to go, and she wouldn't go, and she tried to get Earl to go, and Earl wouldn't go. So she went up there, and he was dead in a smelling. But he died of natural causes. He was drunk, and something happened.
Well, I used to hitchhike around a lot, and I hitchhiked down in Florida and went to Bradenton, and found them and found that boarding house, and stayed down there with them a day or two, and I was just going to hitchhike home, and Vi said, "Oh, it's about time we went home," and said, "We'll just carry you home." So they had a new Ford car, a yellow fancy car, and they bought a big old bottle of whiskey, and they said, "Well, you can drink some beer if you drink." And I had me a few beers, and you talking about coming back from Florida.
Y'all flew in.
Yeah, we flew in and just partying, holding our head out the window and hollering. We went by one car, passed a car from Georgia, and she rolled the window down and hung out and said, "Hey, Georgia cracker."
We went down there with Martha and Miss Howell one time, and they had these spud nuts, like a donut, except it's made out of iced potatoes.
Yeah.
And we went there to get some. It was pretty late that night, and we'd already eaten sandwiches. We weren't hungry, but we did want one of them and some coffee. So Martha and Betty Sue and Vi and me went to get them, and some little shirt-tail boys went out there throwing ice cream and things on Martha's car, calling us nigger lovers. Vi said, "You little black son of a bitches," and they was all white. Son of a bitches, they from Alabama. They ain't no more nigger lovers than you are. She got rid of them. And the police called them and made them, police stopped right after they took off. And Vi told the police, and he stopped and made them clean Martha's car up.
That must have been during the 60s, late 60s.
Yeah, it was.
Well, let's see. Now you married L.J. Smith,
Yeah.
and now the Smiths had a big farm, didn't it?
Big
It's a
farm.
what was all of Smith boys' names? I remember Hiawatha was one of them.
Hiawatha was the oldest, and George, and L.J., and Shirley,
Yeah.
and John Sim, and Minnie Tier come in there somewhere, and William was the baby.
Now Spurgeon was their cousin.
Uncle.
Spurgeon was their uncle.
Uh-huh.
And they was out. They kind of farmed, and their daddy.
They had a sawmill and the farm.
And they were pretty money.
Oh, they made the money as long as they let Mr. Sherman go and buy the timber and everything. But after Shirley got hung in with Carolyn, she had all that stopped. And Shirley didn't have no better sense than to listen at her. And then they separated. And
You lived in a little house that was near near that big house.
up on top of the hill from the big
And I remember me and Terry would come spend the night. We always looked forward to go and stay at your house. There'd be a lot of candy and good stuff to eat.
Yeah.
And I remember one time we went fishing in a little old, right in, there's a pond, and the pond would overflow, and there's a little old ditch, and there's a little hole about a little bit bigger than a wash tub, and we caught the brim, just
you could
bunch
catch them all the time there like that. And you know, Miss Mamie had turkeys, and I had turkeys, and they'd get in the woods and go wild.
Yeah.
And one Thanksgiving that Wallace had to wreck, she had one that was the biggest. Ooh, he was a whopper.
First time I ever shot a shotgun, Wallace thought it'd be pretty funny. He was probably about 16 or something. I was probably, 11, 12. And he fixed this shotgun up with double off Magnum, I mean. And he said, "You want to shoot the gun?" And I said, "Yeah." And you talking about turning somebody around. And then he asked Terry if Terry wanted to shoot it. Terry didn't much want to shoot the gun after if he'd asked him first, he'd have wanted to shoot it. But that was, now Wallace, he was back in the 50s like Fonzie and all them. And didn't he have kind of a famous friend that did some singing back then?
Yeah, what is his name? His parents owns
He was big time. I mean,
he is big time, sure enough now.
And I can't even think of his
I
name.
can't think of his name to save my life.
We'll think of it later.
Oh boy, you ought to see what a house his parents has got in Dothan, which he built. And he had a home in Dothan. I reckon he still got it, but he's everywhere now.
He sings out in Las Vegas.
Yeah. And that was the hungriest young man you've ever seen.
All right, well, what about Betty Sue? Now, how in the world did she ever find her?
I don't know how they found one another.
It's just one of them quirks, I guess.
Yeah.
And then she and Herbert had Lowell and Lowry.
I had Lowell and Tilly, and then Lowry.
Right.
After Tilly died, they had Lowry.
Right, and little Tilly had.
Spun in the child.
Yes. And Herbert lays bricks, and his daddy was a bricklayer, and his brother was a bricklayer. And Lowell is mixing mud and carrying bricks, and he's trying to learn a little bricklaying.
Yeah. If they could do that, though, and get out of Dothan, they could make some money, as good as they are.
Well, let's see. And Charlotte, she moved to Atmore after she got out, went to Troy, and went to Montevallo, and then Troy, and got a job teaching even before she had her degree.
Yeah, your daddy got her that job in Atmore.
And the first year she taught me, and then lived with us, and after she taught a year or two, she got her a little 54 Chevrolet, and she was so proud of it, washed it, wouldn't even drive it. She was trying to save it. And she went somewhere one time, I don't even know if you know about this.
I doubt it.
And so I decided I could drive it.
No,
And
I
I was
didn't.
about 13, 14 years old, and I tore the transmission out of it driving around the block. I knew how to shift the gears, but I forgot about the clutch. And I knew she was making an awful noise, but I got it all the way around the block and got it back parked. And then she tried to drive it, wouldn't drive, and I owned up to what had happened. And I guess Daddy paid and had it fixed, but that was the foolish thing I ever did.
Yeah, you know, Charlotte feels like Lois and Hugh was her mom and daddy. Oh boy, she did. And she's still I think, sort of jealous of Hugh. You know, she's jealous of Lois as long as she lived. And I believe she's still jealous of Hugh.
Yeah, and he's so grouchy at her and things.
She don't more care than nothing though, 'cause
She knows how he is.
yeah, she knows him well.
And she married, after she taught there at Rachel Patterson School till they tore it down and then built a new one, and she's teaching at the new one, and she married George Boyle, a Yankee from Pennsylvania who was in the Air Force down at Fort Walton, and they got together, and they've been living happily ever after. Well, they've been living ever after.
They've been living all this long time together. And I'll never forget one time Charlotte came home. It was when Miss Wallace died, and you know, they let the school out, and she went home, and I went back to Atmore with her, and she lived in that little tacky apartment.
Yeah.
And I slept on the couch.
That little bitty apartment.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And Lois went over there, and oh, you never heard such a fuss as she gave Charlotte. Of course, Charlotte had already gone back to school, and she was fussing with Charlotte because I slept on the couch. She went to gathering up my clothes and carried me to her house. And then your dad, they carried you home. Yeah, I believe you went with us.
Yeah.
And they had lots of tents, you know, preaching tents. And your daddy said, yeah, we have lots of Holy Ghost revivals going on over here. Yeah, I know y'all was with us because Henry was on there. He said, he liked Henry, or pretended he did on the count because you did. And he said, I never did like for a dog to smoke a cigar and sit in my lap.
Yeah, Daddy just he never petted dogs or never fooled with them, or, you know, he might pet one, you know, just kind of hold his hand out flat and do like that, but he just never had much to do with animals. He's too interested in people.
It was funny too when I went to the Catholic church and got him Henry out of the church.
Yeah.
And you know, from then on I could say, Henry, you get on so and so, and he'd go.
He'd mind.
He'd mind me then because I shook him all the way back to the house. I wouldn't let him walk and follow me. I carried him back in my arms, and I'd shake him. I was so mad with him I could have killed him.
Okay, let's talk about Papa and Miss Evie a little bit, and then we'll take a break. Didn't Papa, all right, here he married Grandpa Phillips's daughter Evie, and Grandpa Phillips gave them some land down.
Yeah, and that old...
How many acres, do you know?
I believe it was...
start with?
I believe it was 80 till he died.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, of course, when he died, he had it willed, each one of them to have so much.
Yeah, so they got some more.
Yeah, they got some more.
And so Papa, when he came back from Texas and got married, he lived there on the Phillips place. And he never learned how to drive a car.
No, but you know, they went to Enterprise, Granny and them did, and I don't know, ain't Matt and them.
Yeah.
No, maybe when Granny died, before Granny died, they moved back. Well, I know Granny died in that house.
Did you ever see her?
That
was before your time.
Yes, she died when, I don't reckon Flopsy ever seen her. R.E. did.
So, but they lived, for the most time, he farmed there, and he didn't drive a car, but he always had a wagon, Did he have mules or horses?
He had, well, he bought a horse, but he had Muse, Old Days, that was the old Muse name. And anybody in the world, every child in that community loved that old Muse because she'd let all of us ride her or anything else.
Days?
Old Days was her name.
Like Daisy?
Old Days was all I ever heard. And I'd go to the field about time for Papa to come home for dinner to get to ride Old Days back to the house.
And he farmed that, grew mostly corn and
Peanuts.
peanuts.
He did have cotton till the boll weevils got so bad.
Yeah.
Between my house and Annette's was cotton.
So he started off growing cotton and corn.
Uh-huh. You know, he was a champion corn raiser one year.
What happened about that?
Well, he had the finest corn. You know, Tal Kelly was working with him.
Yeah.
And Tal had fussed at him, say, I raised that corn myself. And he got credit for it. And
well, did Papa usually have a hired man? Or?
yeah, he kept somebody to help him. You know, he weren't able to do it by himself.
Yeah. It's 80 acres, and a lot of that was open ground, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was all just about open ground.
So yeah, it wasn't any way one man and one mule could attend to that.
No.
And he had somebody to help him farm.
Yeah.
Until did Dob and Earl, did they do much farming?
Yeah, they did a lot till they had to go to the army. Well, Dob married, of course, you know, and moved off, and Earl stayed out of the army a pretty good while because Papa didn't have no help. And then he hired this Virgil Benefield. They finally called Earl, and Virgil Benefield helped Papa, and he just didn't have good mind.
Yeah.
He was smart and knew how to farm and all that, but his mind weren't good. And one night, Papa and Mr. Hall got drunk. You know, it's shrubbery out in front of the house, where the old dirt road was right there at the house. And they'd walk. At the table, though, that night, Virgil said, he wouldn't say pass me nothing. He'd say, I want a biscuit. And Mr. Hall picked one up and hit him with it. And they'd stagger till they got near about to the shrubbery, and then they'd jump over. We had the most fun out of them. And Mama was staying with Grandma that night. Grandma, that's when she broke her hip, you know, and never did get up no more.
That was Grandma Phillips.
Uh-huh. She's a little old bitty woman.
Well, didn't you, there had a lot of kids living in that house, and when you were young, you went down and stayed with them, didn't you?
I stayed with them. I'd get mad with some of them didn't go right at home. I'd go to Grandma.
Yeah. So of all the one kids, Grandpa Phillips and Grandma Phillips kind of raised you, didn't you?
Yeah.
More than any of the rest.
Any of the rest. And when they went somewhere, you know, Grandpa was the only one that had a car anywhere between Echo and Midland City at one time. He had the old Model T, and then he had that old Model A.
And Grandpa Phillips had a son named Pharaoh.
Uh-huh.
And
Pharaoh.
And he went barefooted.
The coldest weather he'd have on that old thick flannel lined jumper and going up the road, he'd go up there to see about Grandma and Grandpa every morning and he'd eat breakfast with them. And he'd be barefooted and have on that jacket.
And his wife was Aunt Beauty.
One of the best women that's ever been in the world.
Sure was. I remember that house always as neat as a pin.
Yes, sir. And she used to cook big old pone cornbread and collards. At least she wouldn't cut them up like we do now. She cooked the old leaf, and she'd hull out the inside of the pone cornbread, and make us a collard sandwich. And that was so good. She'd have this big old home-cured fat meat to go in it. And that was so good. And she loved Wallace, I reckon, better than she did her own children. And he'd go down and she'd ask him what would he want for dinner, and he'd tell her a chicken and chocolate pudding, and he never had eaten chocolate pudding in his life. He wouldn't eat nothing like that. Now, he'd eat, well, not bad about eating candy, but he would eat a piece of candy once in a while. And she'd get up there and put him a chair side the stove and let him stir the chocolate pie
Did Uncle Pharaoh ever kill Wallace fishing?
every week.
That, you
2
know,
or
that
3
matters.
times.
As much as Wallace likes to fish, that's where he got
Where
it
he
started.
got it from, and I've always loved to fish. One time he carried us to the river back of the Belverts where Eddie and Verner live now. And I caught an eel, and I thought it was a snake. I threw the pole and all down, went to running in a holler. I think that's the only time he ever got mad with me.
I had a kid a few years ago. I don't know what it was about him, but I called him Uncle Pharaoh. And those kids didn't know who in the world Uncle Pharaoh was.
No, sir, you know, in the Bible, that Pharaoh was mean.
Yeah.
And
Well, Uncle Pharaoh didn't take that part of the name, did he?
no, he sure did.
I always figured, you know, people would name, you know, they just opened the Bible and the first name they came to, they figured the Lord wanted a name, and I figured that's how he got his name.
Yeah, but I don't know how come on the name. But think about Grandma naming me Bennie Frank.
Yep, no.
She had a cousin named Bennie Frank, and she loved that cousin. Well, they was closer than her and her sisters were, until their older days, you know. And she had a sister named Kizzy. Aunt Kizzy. Now that's some kind of a name.
Bennie Frank and Kizzy.
Yeah, and I can't think of none of the rest of her sister's name. And Mama and them had, you know, it was Aunt Rado. Now that was Mama's oldest sister.
Well, let's say, I don't think we've named all them yet.
It's,
Phillips's children.
yeah, it was Aunt Rado and Uncle Pharaoh and Aunt Helan and Mama.
Yeah, and Aunt Helan just died.
About this summer was 2 years ago, I think, or 1 year or 2 years ago. And she lived to be 96, and Mama was 92. And
How old was Papa?
81.
81.
Papa was 81, and Uncle Harv was 81, and Uncle Pharaoh was 81. They all died when they was 81 years old. And Grandma Phillips died when she was 81.
That's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
81. Of course, they say now all this stuff they can do now, we're supposed to live longer than that. So I'll sign up for it.
I don't know where I would or not. I don't want to live.
How old are you right now?
67. I don't want to live to be in the shape Mama and Aunt Helan was in. I don't want that.
Well, now they were in the 90s, so.
Yeah, Aunt Helan's 96. But she just swiveled away. She weren't nothing. I don't never forget what Holman at the funeral home said. You love them to death because they're just the best things, and they never forget nothing, never. And I went in and, well, Annette carried me to Headland to see if I could get some shoes to fit me that I could wear to the funeral because I couldn't wear none I had. And I got these old flat, you know, just cheap shoes to wear, you know, around at home there. Around, and I put them on and went in the funeral home. So the old man Holman, Kenny, come out and he helped Annette. That's when my ankle was so bad. He took hold of my arm to help me into, and he said, well, I'll just tell you, we don't take legs, one leg, so we have to have the whole body. I said, well, you can have that ankle if you want it, if you'll take it. And we went on in to see Aunt Helan, and because I knew I wouldn't get to go, you know, because I couldn't find no shoes that I could wear. And he looked, I was looking at him, and he said, you swiveled up, didn't you? And his youngest son, next to the youngest son, went to Tuscaloosa to get Papa.
Yeah.
And he carried the youngest son with him. He was in school up there in Tuscaloosa, and he got him going out to the hospital with him to get Papa. And that day over there, you know how long it was been since Papa died.
Yeah.
And he remembered that just as good. He said, yeah, says, you're Mr. Yarbrough's daughter. I said, yeah.
Good.
And just think how long that had been, and he remembered. And I'll guarantee you, if you meet one of them on the street, they're going to hug your neck. They just that kind of people.
good folks and good businessmen.
Yeah. Wilton told us, that's Wilton. Kenneth was at Ozark. Wilton's at Headland. And Kenneth's dead, but Wilton's still living. And he said that, it said the only thing since he'd been in that business that ever got him, he said, now that disturbed me. Said that one night he was in the office and said he thought he heard somebody come in, and said he didn't hear nothing else, and said he just kept on and, with his papers till he got them done. He decided he better go in there before he went upstairs to bed. Locked up, went upstairs to bed, and said there sat this lady and man in there, and said the lady had a little baby in her arms, and he said filthy. Said they were so dirty, and said the woman helped the baby out to him. She says, Mr. Holman, I think my baby's dead. And said he took that baby, and he said when he was trying to fix it up, it was so dirty till the skin had come off the back of its little ears. He said, now that got me. He said, I had to get my wife to help me finish. He said, that really did. And he said they didn't know no better. He called the people's name they worked for, farm folks.
Yeah.
And he said they half paid them, half starved them. He said that made him, and he wasn't even charged for that baby's casket or nothing. It buried it and didn't charge nothing. And he told them if the man gave them money to pay for the casket and all, to keep it and buy them some clothes, that he didn't charge. But I don't know whether the man ever did or not. He said that man ought to be run out of Henry County.
What's the best time you remember? If you had to go back in your life and pick the best time you ever, best period of time, what was it?
When we was all at home on the farm, that old house, and that was happy times. We all went, we'd go, nobody had nothing to go on until Papa got his little Jersey wagon.
He had a Jersey wagon. Now, is a Jersey wagon, is that a brand like Studebaker?
Well, no, it's just a little,
wagon.
little wagon. They call the big wagons 2 mule wagons.
And the little one's a Jersey wagon.
Yeah,
well,
one mule pulled in.
You don't remember what kind it was, do you?
No, I don't. I can't remember. I remember the color of it, though. It's green.
Green?
And
yellow?
It had yellow, the name of it wrote on with yellow.
And he bought it brand new?
Brand new, and we'd hitch old days to it and go anywhere we wanted to. He was the only one that had a mule that, anybody weren't scared of, and we'd go to preaching on that Jersey wagon in the mule.
Well, now, where did y'all go to town? You didn't go much, I bet.
No, we didn't go much. Well, Papa, when he'd sell a bale of cotton, he'd go to Ozark, or Headland one.
Yeah.
And once in a while they'd go to Dothan, but not hardly ever. That was too far with the...
They sold the cotton. And now, didn't he do his banking in Headland?
He did in the later years. He done it in Midland City to
start with.
In the later years, he done it in Headland. Major Espy had the bank. He was the high knocker in the bank there in Headland. And he was the best thing to the farmers at all.
Yeah.
And
I've heard Papa call his name.
Yes, sirree.
Well, did y'all, let's see, you didn't go to the, I was trying to picture what it's like. Y'all had that little wagon. It wasn't a rolling store coming by.
Oh, yeah. The old rolling stores would come by and we'd shut corn and shell it in the sheller, where you ground it, sell it to them.
So, and get, what would you get for?
I can't remember what we get for. Well,
would you get like, would y'all get coffee?
Coffee and flour and, things, sugar and chocolate, things like that you couldn't get. In town you couldn't sell your corn to them.
Yeah.
And he'd always get Wallison's, Charlotte's and candy. And they got them where they'd have drinks.
I remember it was even that late in 1950, like 51, 52, back in there. The rolling store was still coming through. But it would come through way back when you was little, too.
Oh, yeah. That's first, as far back as I can remember.
But it would have a motor. It'd be a truck, like
Uh,
a bus or something.
no, to start with, it weren't. It was this man had this old gray mule,
Well, I'm sorry.
and he just picked up from Mexico in Midland City. You know,
Yeah.
that was just that straight line. And always on Thursday he'd have fresh fish, mullet.
Huh. And I bet you all wanted that.
And we got mullet every week.
Well, would he take eggs or
Yeah,
chicken?
the eggs or chickens, and that just like that rolling store did. You know, they had a pen underneath to put the chickens in.
Well, I think that the rolling store even in the 50s would take eggs.
Yeah, they would, chicken and corn too. And you know, Charlotte and Wallace would take them an egg out there and get them a all-day supper, he called them. And now then, one egg wouldn't buy one slice of the gum.
So,
Yeah, they get they, you know, the suckers had candy on each end.
yeah.
And one of them would get the sucker with their egg, and the other one would get chewing gum with their egg, and so they'd swap. Cut sucker in two, and stem in two, and one of them would have the one part and the other. And they never did have much trouble about that, except when the grape sucker, they both want that. And they'd take the chewing gum, each would have two strips apiece, and then they'd cut one in two.
It came 3 to a thing.
5.
Oh,
And they'd
that's
have
it.
2 apiece.
That's it. And they had it down to a science.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember anything about when Mama was little and said she always liked dogs, didn't she? Didn't a bad dog come up? Do you remember when the rabies dog came
Oh
up?
yeah, that the prettiest little old dog, Jimbo. That was his name. He was just about that high, and he was black and white, and he was the prettiest little old thing. Them gave him the lowest. She was fixing to go to another state, and she couldn't take him with her. And you could tell him to say his prayers, and the little old feller put his little paws down, and put his head on his paws. And you could say amen, and he'd raise up then. And old Shepley went and got an old dog, and he had rabies, and he killed I don't know how many dogs. And Lois and Papa, and, well, it's a crowd of people that had dogs that had to take them shots because they'd handled the dog.
Did they found out it had rabies, or they thought it had it? Huh?
He had it, one of Shepley stole. And I think everybody in the country hated him as the reason he had to leave the country.
Well, what happened? How did they get the shots?
Dr. Parrish from Midland City go out to our house every night, and they'd all meet there and get him.
Everybody had handled that dog. Where'd they give them the shots at?
In the stomach around their navel. They had to take 14.
Good. Don't you know they dreaded that happening there?
Yeah.
Especially like somebody like Mama was young. I bet your Papa kind of hated it too.
Everybody, all of them hated it. Mr. Amsdale said if he lived to get over him shot, he was going to hunt Shepley up and kill him.
Well, did anybody ever get the rabies? Any person that you ever heard of?
Yeah, now Grandpa Phillips lived close to a boy that had them. He said that was the pitifulest thing that'd ever been. Said that they changed him to the bed. They'd have to, you know.
Yeah.
And said he'd tell them not to come close to him. He'd know, you know, when he was fixing to have one of them fits. You seemed like a dog did. And Grandpa said he got just like a dog would for one. Said he'd want water, but he couldn't drink it. He said even back when when he was alive, he said now then they could, it would be a law that they could give him a shot to kill him.
Oh, Lord. Rabies was a bad thing. And you know, people can still get that. This wild animals got it.
Yeah, you know, they've killed I don't know how many wild animals this past year in Houston County that had.
Yeah, that was on the news. There was just a bad epidemic of it down there.
Yeah. And you know, Scotty and Phillips Dale Cherry has traps.
Yeah.
And they catch coons and things like that in them, and they just reach in there with their hands and get them. And
Crazy.
we
Scotty?
Yeah, Scotty. As scary as he is. And after so many had rabies, Gator and them made them get these big, thick gloves, you know, like the beef tenders were, and put on to keep them from biting. One Sunday morning, it weren't good daylight. Earl's dog kept rearing. He'd run to Earl's window and bark, and he'd go back to the tree and bark. And it got light enough Earl could see. He got up and went out there to see what he was barking at. And it was a coon up the tree. And he called Gator to come kill him. But he thought that was his property.
Let's see, we had mentioned that Dob and his wife Merlene. Does Dob have another name besides just plain Dob?
It was Theron. Jack Theron Yarbrough. And
Jack.
Jack Theron Yarbrough, but he don't never put that to it.
Jack Theron, and everybody calls him Dob, and his wife Merlene, and they have 4 children.
Yeah.
Annette, and Thea Faye, and Gary, and Michael.
Yeah.
And I think we named everybody else's, didn't
Yeah, except Lois's name, her one was named Eddie.
we? Yeah. That little pitiful.
Yeah.
Well,
Wallace used to want me to look at Lois's suitcase when she
to make sure I didn't load up too much of his stuff.
Yeah, that'd be so funny. The Lois shit just tickled her all over.
Well, I'm going to stop it for a minute, and then we'll put our meat on and turn it back on.
You reckon Ruth needs any?
I didn't have to fix it.